Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? Today's a video that I'm sure none of you guys really know about, but I need you guys to lock in. And today I'm going to be reacting to alternative voting methods. There was a panel that took place on the Braver Angels channel. They brought a bunch of different experts in terms of different voting methods, such as star voting, approval voting, ranked choice voting, etc., etc. And today I'm going to be reacting to see how the conversation goes, see how I don't know if there's going to be a debate, but if you guys don't know, I am an advocate as of right now for alternate voting methods, more specifically star voting, with one of my favorite people, Sarah Woke, on this panel. So this should be very interesting, and I'm curious to see how the back and forth kind of plays out. But we'll start it from 120, not 120, but an hour and 20 minutes in. All the stuff before was just breaking down all the voting methods. I already kind of know that. If you want to watch the full thing, by all means, go to the Braver Angels channel. You can watch the full thing over there.
Lesser evils. And what does that mean for ballot exhaustion? Over to you, sir.
What we tell people is to rank your favorite first, your next favorite second, your third favorite third, and so on until you really don't care. If even among the people that you hate and you don't want to see, you have to ask yourself, well, what happens if none of the people I really like can get elected? And it turns out to be a contest between, I don't know, Hitler and Mussolini, for example. What am I going to do? So that's what we tell people, because they have to make that choice. Can I respond to some of the things that Phil said? Because he threw out a lot of stuff. First of all, our ranked choice voting can be hand counted and audited. Australia started using ranked choice voting long before voting machines existed. He also talked about ballot errors being higher in minority communities with ranked choice voting. Well, that's also true with single choice contests. Ballot errors are higher in minority communities than in more affluent communities. Mistakes get made in tallying single choice elections. A town in New Jersey certified the wrong winner in a single choice election the same year that Oakland had their problem with the school board race. They had to go to court to correct the error, just like Oakland had to correct the error. It's the jungle primary that has hurt third parties. It's hurt them in California too. And we don't use ranked choice voting in state elections, but it's the jungle primary that hurts them. Phil and maybe Felix or Sarah said that ranked choice voting is complex. That's a canard. People rank things all the time. Exit polls show that voters both understand and like ranked choice voting. And I'd like to share, if I can, a report, which I can also share on my screen. Yeah, that voters love ranked choice voting. In Alaska, 85% said ranked choice voting is simple and 62% supported the new system, despite all the problems that Phil says it has. Same in Maine, 61% support keeping or expanding ranked choice. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
I feel like these approval polls are a little misleading. Because like the ability to do ranked choice voting, like, it's simple, right? But in terms of the process after the vote is made, I think that is where the complexity comes up. But I mean,
but you can go take a look at this.
I'm sure someone's going to bring that up.
That he talked about, which was the problems that the mayor of Oakland, the legal problems that the mayor of Oakland is now facing. Well, we have. I want to share. Oops.
30 seconds left in this segment.
Okay, I think I can do this within the 30 seconds. Here we go. Any system can elect people that have problems. Randy Duke Cunningham pled guilty to was elected under California's original primary general election system, pled guilty to tax evasion, conspiracy to commit bribery, mail fraud, and wire fraud. Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey has been indicted for taking bribes and working for foreign governments. Representative Henry Cuellar from Texas has been indicted for money laundering, conspiracy, and bribery. So any
system can elect someone who later runs into trouble with the law. I think it's always eye-opening when, instead of addressing what your particular system is doing wrong and the value of the error that might be taking place, you do, and I'm really getting very familiar with this term, a whataboutism, in the sense that you kind of look at other places and see, but they have this issue too. But if it's an issue, whether or not other places have issues, that's not good, right? Those are also not good issues. So it shouldn't be about what about them. It should be about how do we solve this issue so not only us, but also them don't have that issue.
can elect somebody that later has problems, and those problems are not uncovered before they are elected. It doesn't matter what system you use. The problems do not come out before the election. If they did come out, they wouldn't have been elected. And I'll stop here and go criticize.
Okay, Steve, thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. I want to throw the next question over to Sarah Wolk. So if Sarah, we could bring Sarah back up, and that deals with, we heard from Phil Izan about this idea of education of new voters. Now, what are you anticipating the education load to be for star voting when it comes out?
So I absolutely agree with Phil that voter education is paramount, and that's no matter what system. Even approval voting, which looks like a traditional ballot, voters need to know that this is a different system. You can do it differently. And so that's, I think, the most significant implementation cost for star voting. Aside from that, it works with existing voting machines. It's compatible with existing protocols with minor updates. But in terms of, I did want to respond to something that Steve said about complexity. And nobody's saying that voters can't 1, 2, 3 rank things. That's not what we're talking about when we say that ranked choice voting is complex. We're talking about how the votes are tallied and the voter experience. So what we've seen is that voter error ballots that are just thrown out right off the top because the voter couldn't follow the instructions are much higher under ranked choice voting. And that's because if you do honestly like 2 candidates equally, you can't have 2 first choice votes. And people do that all the time, and it causes their ballot to be thrown out.
So to kind of break down, one of the issues is that votes being thrown out is a big problem concerning the value of voting in America. We don't want any votes thrown out. So the idea of ranked choice voting is if it's done incorrectly by ranking things the same way, that vote can be thrown out, and that'll be very irritating. I'm sure all of us know this. The value of a vote is second to none. So that is what she's pointing out in terms of that complexity issue. And that's in part due to voter education, of course, but also due to the method that is being implemented, allowing or not allowing certain certain tactics or techniques while voting that can throw away a vote. But basically, if you make a mistake, your vote gets thrown out.
Candidates in many jurisdictions, voters can't skip rankings. So you can't do like first choice, third choice, fourth choice, or whatever. That could cause your ballot to either be thrown out or to be mistallied. And that's what happened in Alameda County in the Oakland, California area, where they mistallied every single ranked choice election because they actually did the steps of the election in the wrong order. And that's the election officials. They did the ranked choice, eliminate a candidate, transfer the votes, those steps in the wrong order. Nobody caught the error because the code is so complex, and they certified the wrong winner in one case who actually took office. So these are massive complexity issues that there's tons of data showing that, voter error rates have gone up under ranked choice voting. Yes, lower education voters are more likely to make mistakes in any system, but it's the increase we saw does statistically hurt communities of color, especially non-native speakers, at much higher rates. And that's just a deal breaker. It's not something we need to compromise on. Under star voting, giving equal preference is not a wasted vote. I mean, that's not a mistake. You're allowed to show equal preference if you like candidates equally.
Edmund, we have about 20 seconds.
Okay. I think you're at the culmination. So thank you so much for that, Sarah. Appreciate that answer. I'd like to go to Felix next. If we could have Felix come up. And for Felix, you had talked about not Brian Schmidt, Felix. And Felix Sargent, there he is. Okay, you had talked about this idea that vote splitting is one of the biggest problems. But then the statistic you gave was just basically who got in elections where they got less than 50%. And I noticed in the graphic, okay, you've got Luke and Leia, which of them would ever vote for Vader, but there were probably Democrats, that Ross Perot's kind of would have split between Democrats and Republicans, the same maybe for Ralph Nader. So how can we know that vote splitting really is that major of an issue? Over to you, sir.
So unfortunately, we can't because we don't collect that preference information on elections, right? But what we can tell is there was not a majority winner, right? And especially when we see the great thing is, let's say we have 10 candidates, right? And one person gets 11% of the vote, right? well, they're going to win because they got, like 10 candidates in an election out of 100%. They've got more than everybody else in that election. So people have 9, 7, 6, 5, 4% of the vote after it. I don't think that you can say if someone gets, 11% of the votes in an election that they are, they have really the endorsement of the people, right? You don't actually know. You don't have the information to know if they have majority support. They might, right? They might be everyone else's second choice winner, and they ended up just being, the candidate who just managed to just get it over the edge. But because you're not collecting that information, you're not doing a poll. And in fact, I think it's important for us to think about what is an election. It's a poll, right? You're just asking people questions. What do you think? There's no reason that we should limit the information that we're able to get from people. And so that's why using a method such as approval voting or star voting, where you can give your honest opinion about a candidate without it affecting your ability to give an honest opinion about a different candidate. So you have an independence of information there, which allows us to come up with the best candidate in an election.
Great and good point. I agree.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I greatly appreciate it.
I think as of right now, especially considering the wave of like social media and the way that people's becoming very, very much opinionated, and I think to an extent becoming more involved into politics despite not knowing anything about politics, those people's thoughts, those people's opinions, at the very least should matter to its fullest extent. At this point, it should, right? If we're putting people like Joe Biden and Donald Trump into office as our two primary presidential candidates, people should be allowed to voice their opinions to the utmost fullest extent. And that's why something like approval and star voting provide that to its T, right? You get to know what they think about each candidate. You get to know their preference, their favorability for each candidate. And that gives a fuller picture on the value of the candidate. And also this information will play into a bigger strategy moving on for future elections when you get to understand that it's more than obviously the general popularity of the candidate, like DeSantis being second most and Nikki Haley being third most, for example. But you get to know how they feel about the candidate. You get to know how much they don't feel about another candidate. And it really tells you whether or not it's a notoriety thing, how much they know about someone, or is it a policy thing, how your policies are bad, or is it a rhetoric thing, your rhetoric is bad. You get the full scope of information, and that'll help us put the best candidates forward. So
my next question then is going to go over to Phil Izon. And the question I have for Phil is I'll wait till Phil comes up. I know there's a little bit of a delay. Okay. There seems to be a lot of drive around the country to improve the voting method or change the voting method. Now, in your understanding, and you've looked for tolerance or testing or things like that, how would you want to respond to people who say, it's time for a change? We need to do something. We need to do something now. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely some points there. I do have a video that kind of covers this a little bit. If I could share, okay, and then I can kind of answer the question a little bit better.
Just remember, it's a 3-minute segment.
Yep. It's a quick one.
all right, let's see what they bring to the table.
Oh, well, I guess it was not going to let me. But nonetheless, so the point of the video was what I talked about earlier had to do with the funding. And so I think that that's really where it comes down to for me, is that if the funding of the third party or of these new organizations is not necessarily beneficial, it's not grassroots. There's, I understand that most people say they have to get money from out of state and or from other organizations. Not necessarily. I did my repeal with grassroots. I did my repeal. I didn't hire signature gatherers. I didn't hire a signature gathering firm. I did it with volunteers, 700 plus volunteers. I led the drive. I gained over 580 signatures in a single day. I personally gathered over 2,000 signatures on my initiative. We needed 26,000 signatures. I gave 43,000 signatures to repeal ranked choice voting. And again, that's done with volunteers. So if a group is more that, then I'd be much more inclined to listen. If every group that I've spoken to on this call, they all use paid signature gatherers, and most of the organizations, even the recall in Oakland, used paid signature gatherers. And it's just not really authentic. If you're hiring people from out of state or out of an organ, out of place to come to your place to gather signatures from your citizens and then call it a
What? I completely disagree with that notion. One, when it comes down to doing these activities, there needs to be a recognition that it takes time. We all know this takes time, right? And when something takes as much time as it does to gather signatures, the intent, yes, you want a certain level of care, which I do agree with, but you also want to take care of the people that is getting involved into what is going on, because their time getting wasted, or not wasted, but their time getting taken up for free is going to limit the potential resources they do or do not have. So you pay these people so they can focus all their energy onto what is going on currently. Having paid people is not a bad thing by any means. Yes, you may have some people who are not as bought into the ambition as others, but you also can bring them in towards the goal that is being trying to set by bringing people in that just need a job. They get a job, they come over here and they go like, "Oh, this is what this is about," and they spread the word. So you're doing two things. You're um, making sure people are set and they don't have to worry about extra stuff because their time is being taken, so they can afford more time towards the activity because they don't have to work because this is a job. And two, you are bringing in more people who don't know about it already, and these people who don't know about it already are able to spread the word to those people because their circles also probably don't know about it. So I completely disagree with this entire claim that there's something wrong with having paid supporters. Like, what are we talking about? I feel like this is some kind of elitist take saying, "Oh, my guys do it for free." So I'm no. If you have volunteers, fine, that's cool. There's nothing wrong with having volunteers, but you throwing shade at paid supporters doesn't make sense.
Citizens initiative. It's just super deceiving and it's wrong. And if you're going to do that, then I'm not going to be very supportive of that. And so I'm supportive of grassroots groups that are actually.
He's not supportive of people getting paid. How much of a lot of these oh man, my issue with this is a lot of these grassroots organizations tend to hire people who are very young, who don't really have to worry about expenses in the first place, or people from college. A lot of them are college people who can afford time to just go to college because they're in college, or afford time to volunteer. And also, a lot of the value of these volunteering plays into other factors. So they're still gaining something, whether it's credit from college or school, whether it's credit from a different job, or whether it is building upon a reputation to put on a resume for a future political endeavor. You're still gaining a lot just from being there and doing the job. Yes, there are people who care for sure, but you are being super dishonest on how you're approaching this conversation. That's just me. That's what I think. You know what I'm saying?
Committed to working with the community, is building up their reputation, and that goes for third parties too. So third parties are not.
I like third parties, by the way. I think his argument is just very.
So if you really look down in history, parties have fluxed, up and down. Used to be a Federalist Party, used to be all kinds of things. Libertarian Party is coming up and up and coming. I think it comes to RFK is a great example. It proves that it matters of what candidate you're running, not necessarily the party platform. And so you need, as a party, if you want to run a third party, if you want to.
Do I agree with that? No, I think the notability, or no, there's a better terminology. The influence of the platform that the person is running on matters a lot. Now, one person can completely uplift the platform to put it on a higher status. That is possible, but it's not a one or the other necessarily. I would say it's easier to build a platform than finding the perfect candidate. It's very hard to find the perfect candidate. And RFK Jr. is not necessarily the perfect candidate. He's just in a situation where the other two candidates are so awful that he stands out. So, yeah, I'm disagreeing with a lot of this.
You need to have good quality candidates. I think that's where it starts and ends.
I do agree having high quality panelists matter, though.
I would like to go back to Steve now, if we can. And the question that I have for Steve is about this idea of majority. And you say, it's important to have a majority, but there seems to be different definitions of majority. Majority of registered voters, majority of active voters, majority of last voters, multiple majorities. How are you in the ranked choice voting movement seeing majorities?
Okay, well, there is what I call a cohesive majority, which is a clear majority of voters supporting a single candidate. And if I may, I'd like to show how star voting violates that.
All
Here's a
right.
simple star voting election. We have 5 voters, V1 through V5, and 3 candidates, Ann, Bob, and Carl. And voters give them these scores. So Ann has V1, V2, V3. I'll give Ann.
Let me
5.
understand the
Here's a simple
question.
star voting
I
which is a
actually
clear
don't know what the question is.
Of majority. The question that I have for Steve is about this idea of majority. And you say, it's important to have a majority, but there seems to be different definitions of majority: majority of registered voters, majority of active voters, majority of last voters, multiple majorities. How are you in the ranked choice voting movement seeing majorities?
Okay, well,
Okay. I don't know what necessarily the value of the majority is in the question, so I don't really understand what the question is here, but we'll see.
there is what I call a cohesive majority, which is a clear majority of voters supporting a single candidate. And if
A cohesive majority is a clear majority of voters supporting a single candidate. Okay.
I may, I'd like to show how star voting violates that.
So star voting doesn't have a majority of people who support a single candidate. Why is that a bad thing? I don't. So what? Why I don't why is that a bad thing? I don't really understand that. I don't really understand why that's a bad thing. Why is it a bad thing? Okay, I'm just asking the same question. All right, maybe he's going to explain. Let me hear.
Here's a simple star voting election. We have 5 voters, V1 through V5, and 3 candidates, Ann, Bob, and Carl. And voters give them these scores. So Ann has V1, V2, V3. I'll give Ann 5 points, Bob 4 points, and Carl 3. And V4 and V5 give Carl 5, and Bob 3, and Ann nothing. So Carl and Bob have the highest scores, and they advance the automatic runoff, which Bob wins 3-2. Yet a clear majority, 3 out of 5, 60% of the voters prefer Ann to all other candidates. And yet Ann.
Consider 5 voters. Voter 1, voter 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 voters. Consider 5 voters? 5 rounds of voters? 5 voters. Oh, that's the score. My bad. So these are the 5 voters. Their score is 1 through 5. Okay, 3 candidates. 3 of the voters prefer Ann over all the candidates. So in this situation, the majority prefers Ann in this situation. But in the Bob and Carl, okay, the highest score so advanced, which Bob wins. Clear majority 3-2 prefer Ann to all others, yet Ann loses. This cannot happen under ranked choice voting. Bob is no one's favorite, yet Bob wins. This also cannot happen under ranked choice voting. It also affects campaign style. Okay. Why is this a bad thing? I'm trying to figure out. So, just because this happened doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Because in this situation, right, if 3 people prefer this one candidate, that's fine. But the value of the candidate has to appeal to the mass populace. So the mass populace has a feeling about this candidate. She's on the top, but 2 other people who have different values, different type of values altogether, see Ann as the worst candidate possible. It's possible that those 3 people have a misguided notion on who Ann really is as a candidate. And that's perfectly fine, which is why 2 other voters saw this differently and think her values and what she represents completely undermines what we say. So having a cohesive majority doesn't necessarily mean having a cohesive majority is not necessarily a good thing, because in this situation you have a circumstance where overall Bob is not the number 1 candidate, but he's the second most important candidate. So he still has a lot of value. There's a lot of value from the first 3 voters towards Bob, and the other 2 people say he's not. He's all right. He's good. I think he doesn't completely meet with me, but there are things to really like about this guy. So the majority is not solely supporting one candidate, but the majority is agreeing on the value of one candidate. So you're actually getting better results in terms of the mass populace from the star voting method versus the other one. Because the other method is purely focused on the thoughts of the best candidate by a couple people. Well, I guess not a couple people, but the majority of the people. Well, the star voting encapsulates the entire population's opinions about the candidate versus just 51% of the opinions of one candidate. So, yeah, I really had to break that down before he said anything. Let's see if he says anything that differentiates what I say. But if he can't make a compelling argument why cohesive majority not having one is a bad thing, then he doesn't win this.
And loses. That can't happen under ranked choice voting.
So
Bob is also nobody's favorite, yet he wins. And as I said
So?
before, that affects campaign style. In that
So?
Bob to be everybody's second choice but nobody's first choice, you just have to be.
That means that he still has extreme values throughout the country. If he's the second choice throughout, that means people think that he is still a great candidate. They just prefer someone more because they match their style perfectly. But the other people don't also think that he also has a lot of value. The majority of people think, yeah, I would be fine if he's a candidate. He has a lot of value throughout the entirety of America. That's what this means.
Bland and say, well, I will do whatever the voters want. I will poll my constituents when a controversial issue comes before us, and I'll decide what to do then. And another issue with star voting.
Yeah, you didn't really explain. Let me give you another chance. You didn't explain.
First choice. You just have to be bland and say, well, I will do whatever the voters want. I will poll my constituents when a controversial issue comes before us, and I'll decide what to do then.
What? He didn't make a point here. He didn't make a single point here. Do whatever my constituents want. In this style, you have to appeal to everybody much better. You have to really stay true to the facts of who you are. And people are going to see past that. You can't, it's impossible to appease everybody. But you're looking out for the best candidate for the entirety of the country, not the best candidate for the one side of the country.
And another issue with star voting is that the score that V1 and V2 and V3 gave to their second favorite hurt their first favorite. If one of them had given Bob a score of 0,
V1 and V3 score for their second favorite hurt their first. If one of them gave Bob a score of 0 and would have won, under ranked choice, but your second favorite can never hurt your first. If a sincere second choice or a sincere score for a second favorite can hurt your sincere first choice, people stop voting sincerely and start voting strategically. V1 to 3 score for their second favorite hurt their first. If one of them gave Bob a score of 0 and would have won. And would have won. How are they going to vote strategically, though? Right? What is the strategic method that you're going to put into place to ensure that your second favorite doesn't hurt the first favorite? What method are you going to put in place?
that would have changed the overall score results, and Anne would have won. She would have made the runoff with 15 points, and then three voters
I mean,
supported her over Carl, 2 voters supported Carl over her, so she would have won. So if a sincere second choice or sincere score for a second favorite can hurt your first choice, which is also true in approval voting, people stop voting sincerely and start voting strategically. Now, the way we define a majority in ranked choice voting,
I still don't understand, like, the first point you made had no value. And the second point, I'm trying to figure out what strategic method would you put in place that exists to counteract to prove what you're talking about. Because the worry of your second concern is that you're worried people will vote strategically. So how would that work? Like, I'm curious to see how that would work.
Majority of ballots in the final round. Now, there are people, I'm only going to vote for one person, and if my favorite can't win, I don't really care who wins the election. It's like not showing up for a runoff election. So they don't get to participate. They've voluntarily decided not to participate in the runoff election, so they don't get counted in determining what is a majority. We define it as a majority in that last round. Now, there was a problem with early equipment that only allowed you to rank 3 candidates in California, and if you had a large field, you had people whose first 3 candidates all got eliminated, and their ballot was involuntarily exhausted. Modern equipment allows you to rank 10 candidates. You rarely have a field that's that large. So the only exhausted ballots we find now in modern elections are those where the voters themselves have voluntarily decided, you know, if none of my first 3 or 4 people can win, then I really don't care who gets elected. I'm not going to bother showing up in that final runoff. So that's how we define the majority.
I don't think you I don't think he set up the value of cohesive majority. It's just a term that exists, but doesn't mean it's good. Like you didn't break down why it's a good thing to have a cohesive majority. I'm not gonna lie.
All right, perfect. Thank
30
you so
seconds.
much. You know what? That brings us to Sarah. You on some of those points, and if we could have Sarah come back
Yeah,
up,
let's hear
because I
Team
would like to
Sarah.
hear more. And of course, you can go in the direction that you
Am I biased towards star voting? I wouldn't say so. I just go based on what I think is the best. Because initially I looked up voting alternative methods. I initially heard about ranked choice voting first. I thought it was cool. Then I learned more about ranked choice voting and saw its inefficiencies. And then I learned more about star voting and thought it was better. And I was like, hey, star voting, come on my platform. And I had a podcast episode where I had Sarah Woke come on the platform and talk about star voting. So
want to go. But about this idea of, can I hurt myself by voting a certain way in star voting, so that, you know, it's strategically better to vote not for what I actually want?
Yeah, and I think that can be tied into responding to Steve's example there. So in Steve's example, what we have is an election in which, you know, 3 out of 5 voters prefer first choice one candidate, and 100% of that majority faction actually likes all the other options too. They ranked nobody in last choice. So that's right off the top. You have the entire majority who should have won didn't follow the first instruction on the ballot, which is give your favorite 5 stars, give your last choice 0. And so that's how we can tell that this is like a completely contrived attack example. But as Steve showed, if even one of those voters had followed the instructions, then the winner that he says should have won would have won. So that's not a strategic incentive. That's basic voter education, and it's right there on the ballot. Give your favorite 5 stars, give your last choice 0 stars. But to his point, you could contrive an example in which 51% of voters are Nazis, and their political agenda is to murder.
oh, that's also a good point. In the sense of that example he created, in that situation, the voter 4 and voter 5, they would have, the way they should have voted should have, it's because it was like 3 4 5. It should have been the top guy should have been 3 3, and then it should have been 5. So they didn't vote correctly, which is voter education. I still think, why does it matter? The overall value is still there. But if they didn't do it right, and this is, let me break down 139. Let me break down what I mean. So what she's saying is that, okay, let's say these are the 5 voters. Now 3 4 5 is the numbers that is being used here. Usually we would have 5 candidates and it would be 1 2 3 4 5, whatever, right? So 3 4 5. These 2 voters didn't use it right because they did 3 5 0. Nobody else did 3 5 0. So this should have been 3
And yet Ann Lou
3 3 4 4 5 5. And if this was 3 3, this guy would have gotten 5 10 15 3 3 6, and that would have been 21. So the total for this guy would have been, or her would have been 21. So yeah, this is just not done correctly, because this, the least favorite should have been at least a 3. Do you understand what I'm saying? That is what Sarah's saying. So I just had to break that down for you.
Point. You could contrive an example in which 51% of voters are Nazis, and their political agenda is to murder everybody else. Should that candidate always win? If there was another candidate who doesn't want to murder anybody and is the favorite of 49%, but even the Nazis really respect them and like them too, they give them 3 stars, just like Steve's example. So here we have an anti-murder candidate with 49% of the vote. You know, do we elect the Nazi? No, that's a clearly unrepresentative, problematic winner. So what star voting and actually approval voting and almost all voting methods are designed to find that consensus winner, the candidate who would make as many voters as possible as satisfied and represented.
That's exactly my earlier point. Articulated beautifully.
as possible with the results. And that's the mathematical definition of accuracy that we have peer reviewed.
Facts.
And what it shows is that, you know, our current voting system is bottom of the barrel in terms of electing these kinds of polarizing, unrepresentative candidates in some competitive races. And ranked choice solves that problem if only the two frontrunners are viable. In a Ralph Nader situation, ranked choice can help. But if there's multiple viable candidates in ranked choice voting, the problem stems to the fact that you're not actually counting all of the rankings people give. And in competitive races, those other rankings are relevant. So you have to count all the data or you get really sideways results some of the time.
Okay, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for that. And I'd like to go back to Felix because that is another area that I'm interested in. With approval voting, you don't have that much ability to express yourself in the same way that you do with like star voting. Does that impact it from a strategic standpoint, as Steve was mentioning? Over to you.
I think there's a lot of like, well, what do you mean by strategic there, right? When people talk about strategic or tactical voting, same thing, same meaning ultimately. What they're saying is they don't want you to behave in a way that's kind of dishonest, right? The interesting thing about like a well-designed voting system, your strategic incentives and your honest incentives are aligned, right? You don't have to, you know, you don't. It's when you're, let's say I have an earnest preference for Bernie Sanders, but I know that Hillary Clinton is the only viable one, right? And that means, well, my honest and my strategic incentives aren't aligned in that scenario. In star and approval, you would vote for Bernie Sanders 5 stars, right? That's your honest preference. And even in ranked choice voting, you vote your honest preference number 1, right? In approval voting, the question of do you also vote for Hillary Clinton in that scenario is something that you have to leave up to you. And so I want to kind of go back to Steve Chesson and oh my gosh, sorry, and Jordan said that there's no perfect voting method, right? There's always a flaw. But they both said that when there is a flaw, like there are some big flaws and some little flaws, right? One of the littlest flaws we can have is something that's called Gabrathwaite. Sorry, I'm tripping over my own words here. Gibbard-Smithwaite's criterion, and it effectively says if you people's preferences, what they actually end up voting doesn't change depending on how the polls are doing, right? So let's say if it was Hillary and Bernie neck and neck, and Trump wasn't really part of the picture at all, well, now in approval voting, I would vote just for Bernie, right? Because I want to make sure that there's a clear difference there. But if I know that like, hey, you know, Trump and Hillary are neck and neck, and Bernie's not in there, well, I might vote for Hillary and Bernie, right? I'm voting for my honest favorite, but I'm also voting for a backup because I really don't want Trump, right? Now, that is a problem in approval voting. You might get into those situations. I've had many people say like, well, why would I do approval voting? Because I'm only going to vote for one candidate because the idea of supporting someone who isn't my favorite, I can't deal with it. That's allowed. That's good. You'll actually still get the exact same election results under that scenario than if people were choosing to rank all the candidates that they would be viable. In fact, it's required because you need some people to say, no, I feel stronger about this candidate than all the other candidates in order for you to figure out who's truly the winner in the scenario.
Felix, let me interrupt real quick.
And the strategic value of that will also provide an incentive to be more educated on the candidates, right? Because overall, people have a general idea between the more popular candidates, at the very least, in terms of the big federal presidential election. It's Donald Trump, Joe Biden, they both exist. What are these clips are saying? Oh, these clips are saying Joe Biden's incoherent. Oh, these clips are saying Donald Trump knows nothing about politics. This is who I'm voting for. Baseline, you knew it was these two guys. Who looks worse? I'm going to vote for the other guy. Those are, I would say, a good chunk of people on why they vote. But if they're given the incentive that there is a certain strategy that they can apply to the voting method that they're about to employ, and know that there are different candidates that exist and that their value in terms of whether or not they can play a part in terms of the overall election is there, that will incentivize them to know more about more candidates. So just because it can be strategic doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing that it is strategic, because voting is somewhat of a strategy. But the biggest thing that we want from it is having an idea, a thought, a feeling, and representing your ideas and your feelings towards the voting sheet as best as possible. And whether or not you want to be as informed as possible in terms of the more candidates that your voting actually will have value towards, that is up to you. But now it's an option. And right now, as of right now, in terms of how voting works, it is not an option. So
Get your mic. I think it's not right.
Oh, you can't hear me? Is that better?
Oh, there. Yeah, it's getting bounced around. That's all. Please.
Okay, thank you so much.
That's our
Just
3
to-
minutes, unfortunately.
Okay,
Just to remember Felix for next time, it's whenever you touch the cable, it's picking up like a crackle.
yeah, sorry, I
Don't
just had my
bump the
other
wire.
the headset I was just using, the earpads just.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks switched out.
It's
Yeah,
different now.
you just don't touch it, it works.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay, so
Um,
thank you for that. And that's good. And
Can I
again,
just
we're
take
not- we're not-
10 seconds to finish the sentence?
you've got
which is
finish your
just-
sentence.
Okay. So ultimately, as we're saying, you want viable alternative, like independent candidates. So you have that in approval voting, you have that in star voting. Yes, you might be a bit strategic about how far down you go, but it doesn't change the results. And that simplicity is one of the reasons that approval voting is the method that I endorse the most.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I do want to move on to Phil Izon here because we have been hearing a lot about strategic voting, vote splitting, and from what I can gather, our current system, once we get Philip up here.
Phil, I can't spotlight you until you turn your camera on.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay, there we go. All right. Anyway, so for the vote splitting, strategic voting, I mean, what is the current state of plurality voting or regular voting for that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that you can't vote strategically. I say that the one of the things that you do get rid of with moving to RCV is like the political blackmail that third parties have. So that's gone. So third parties are essentially eliminated entirely. And like so when you move over to the strategic system, if you look at ranked choice voting, and let's just use you could use the Oakland mayor race where there's video evidence of people essentially talking to one another about how, like, I'll give you a job if you select me as your number two, so you get my number twos, number ones. And then here in Alaska, you had the U.S. Senate 2022 race where all the Democrats, over 30% of Democrats from the 2020 race, ultimately voted for Lisa Murkowski in the first round, essentially giving two Republicans 90% of the vote in the first round, and the Democrat only getting 10%. If that's not strategic voting, I don't know what is. So if we go to spoilers and vote splitting, so ranked choice voting with the ability to essentially have candidates being removed from the ballot after the fact, and the Supreme Court of Alaska determining that the Division of Elections had violated state law, removing Al Gross from the ballot, allowed the vote splitting of Sarah Palin and Nick Begich, because like I said earlier, no matter how much education you do, some of these Republican voters are not ever going to vote for a second. They will only vote for one person. Doesn't matter how many times you tell them, doesn't matter how much you try to message to them, doesn't matter. They won't do it because it's against their morals. It's against their values. They're not going to change because you guys want them to. Okay. So those people are being disproportionately impacted because you want to reform something. And so that's not good, right? So we don't want to do that ever. And so anytime we have a system like,
that's not a good enough reason not to do the reform. Just because people are stubborn on their own ways, this is not a good enough reason not to do reform. Not at all. Not even close. I'll let it go for now, though, but that's not a good enough reason not to reform. I'm just put that out there.
like I said, star voting, where the exhausted ballot concern is eliminated, and then the precinct level counting is an option. I'm much more supportive of that type of system. And if it could potentially get rid of these issues that, obviously potentially plague our.
Hey, man, he supports star voting. He's a good guy in my book. But am I being a hypocrite? I still stand by everything I said. But I think personally, this is what I think. I think often people have this kind of like absolutist rhetoric, and they don't contextualize all the time when they're talking, which is fair because even I don't do that. Sometimes I go like all and like good, and yeah, I say like absolute terms to kind of create a immediate kind of moral or factual function based on what I'm saying. So if I take that into account, even though I was kind of giving him shit, people won't change their ways. I still don't think that's not a good enough reason, but I don't think he necessarily means never but you just need to have a better method to deal with those people who don't want to change their ways. That is what I think he means, and that's what I'm going with.
Existing system, fantastic. If it does produce third parties and helps third parties win, very happy about that. I don't think approval.
He's an advocate for
based precedent
third
around a
parties,
long
what it
time,
sounds like,
and I
which
don't
I'm an
think ranked choice
advocate for
voting,
too.
Like I said, established 1299. I don't think these places, neither one of these have any kind of history that proves that they could be. I think star voting potentially has the ability to prove that at this point. They don't have the data to prove it now, but they could potentially prove it in the future, and I'm supportive of that.
Same here, boy. Let's go,
perfect.
Felix.
Thank you so much.
Phil, let's go, Phil.
Okay, it is now time to get to some of your questions. And I am actually going to send the first question out to, and we don't bother doing show of hands, we do this through the chat. If you just joined us late, if you have a question and your last name starts with A through K, please send your question to Brady Young. And if it starts through L through Z, please send it to Sarah Yu. We are compiling all the questions together. We're finding the ones that are common and trying to make sure all of our panelists will be engaged throughout the event. If we don't get to yours, it's not because we're trying to restrict which questions come through. It's just a matter of time, and you should have ways to contact all of the different panelists through their organizations that have been put into the chat. So I want to ask my first question to Sarah, actually. If we can bring Sarah back up. The question that we have from the audience is, I've heard that candidates ask their supporters to rank only them, only one, so that they don't hurt their favorite in star voting. Now, how harmful is that?
So in any voting method, you're going to have polarized voters who only like their favorite and they hate everybody else. They're, they want to vote for one person only, like Phil's grandpa. And that's entirely fine in star voting or in any voting method. If you want to just vote for one, that's your right. But there is a strong incentive to show your down ballot support. So in star voting, I co-authored a peer-reviewed study on this where we've modeled voter incentives. And what we found is that the best strategy is the instructions. Give your first choice, give your favorite 5 stars, show your preference order between the candidates. And doing so ensures that even if your first choice doesn't make that runoff, that your vote ultimately goes to the finalist you prefer. So there's a very strong incentive to at least show your preference order between viable candidates. And so I think conservatives feel burned by what happened in Alaska. And so that's why they're not going to listen to ranked choice voting advocates. Just super quickly, I wanted to share my screen, but it's turned off. But voters were told it's safe to vote your conscience. Your vote won't backfire. There won't be wasted votes. And in ranked choice voting, all of those things are verifiably false in a competitive multi-candidate election like they had. So this is where I think Phil said that voting reform advocates really need to differentiate from this broken, outdated version of ranked choice voting. Again, there are better ways to count ranked ballots, but with the system that's being promoted with tens of millions of dollars every year nationally, if you're telling people what they want to hear and then their first election
they are grilling ranked choice voting,
false,
but it's true. Ranked choice voting is problematic. It has certain inefficiencies that we're not accounted for.
Existential threat to star voting, to approval voting, to the future of voting reform. And to the dark money thing, star voting was actually just on the ballot in Eugene. It was strongly favored to win. We were looking great. We hadn't had any opposition. We had no local opposition. And then in the 11th hour, they spent close to $100,000, and 100% of that money was traced back directly to the ranked choice voting lobby. So ranked choice voting spent $100,000 to.
I can't believe that. I didn't know that. That's crazy. Ranked choice voting. We being deceitful? We being manipulative? We being evil? That's crazy. I didn't know that. That's tough.
Choice voting lobby. So ranked choice voting spent $100,000 to kneecap star voting, to try and kill it in the cradle with talking points like it's untested, when in fact, the only way to test it is to try it. So this is an existential threat to the voting reform movement. When people say, shouldn't we just go with the momentum is repealing ranked choice voting, and we need to stop throwing good money after bad.
All right. Thank you so much.
It dawns me that doesn't seem right. I feel like I'm missing something. But it's crazy how we all advocate for voting reform that reflects the voices of the people much more efficiently and better now than it does, or better alternatively than it does now. And then we are fighting amongst each other. It's crazy how much this actually happens when we want better, but the solutions are fighting against each other because they want their solution more. It's disturbing. It's quite disturbing.
Much. I actually have a question then also for Steve. Next, if we could have Steve come on up now. And this is from one of our folks in the audience. And it's this idea that for ranked choice voting, as well as STAR and some other ones, there seems to be this assumption that voters are knowledgeable about the nuanced difference between the different candidates. Is there any kind of evidence that that is actually true and they don't just cynically vote for that one that they're told?
What we find is that in ranked choice voting elections, and I refer you back to some of those fair vote pages, that voters, especially people of color, rank more candidates than whites tend to do. That's what the exit polls, the ballot analysis. Because one of the things we do in ranked choice voting in California anyway is we require the election official to produce a cast vote record report, which shows every ballot how. It's anonymous, of course. You can't trace a ballot back to a voter, but it shows what the rankings are, rankings on each ballot. And this, by the way, is how the mistake in Oakland was discovered, because a third party took those cast vote record report and ran the ranked choice voting tally and came up with a different result than the Oakland registrar had. Contacted the registrar and discovered that the registrar had made a mistake in setting on the equipment. It wasn't that they did things in the wrong order, like Sarah said. It's that they had a wrong setting, which treated. Well, I won't go into the details of that, but basically that setting, by the way, the Secretary of State has required Dominion to remove the ability to make that setting from their software. I'm sorry, I lost the thrust of your question there.
It was just how, what evidence do you have that the voters are actually doing nuanced decisions?
Yes. If you drill down to some of those exit poll reports, they go into how many voters actually rank more than one candidate. And we do see voters taking advantage of rankings when they can. I do want to respond to something that Sarah said about, she gave a scenario where 51% of the voters are Nazis. Well, if 51% of your voters are Nazis, you have much bigger problems, and no voting system is going to solve it. And those Nazis, they are going to vote strategically. You 5 points to their favorite and 0 to everybody else, and they're going to end up winning. So
then they're not doing it correctly. And if they do it 0 to everybody else, then that plays into your earlier point that they won't get voted because the person who had 5 and 0 everybody else still lost.
Much bigger problems if you're.
That was not a good point at all. That was not a good point, not even in the slightest.
If your voters, if 51% of your voters are Nazi. And do I have time to respond to some of the approval comments that were made?
A little under a minute.
A little under a minute. Okay.
Yep. Until you.
Fine. I would like to share a slide related to approval voting. One of the problems I have with approval voting is it leads to hypocritical campaigning. I will tell my supporters, only approve me, don't approve anybody else. But then I will go to other supporters of other candidates and say, please consider approving me too. Whereas under ranked choice voting, I'm going to tell my supporters, rank me first. If there's other people that you like, it's okay to rank them second, third, because you're ranking them second or third is not going to hurt me. And then I'm going to go to supporters of other candidates, say, I know you're ranking your favorite first, but I'd like you to consider ranking me second or third. So in approval voting, giving an approval to my second favorite hurts my first favorite, and it leads to bullet voting. And his experience with elections at the Dartmouth Board of Trustees, Student Trustees election, and I'll post that link into the chat. And also we're seeing that in Fargo. Fargo's only had 2 cycles. And what we see with approval voting in Dartmouth, and I'm going to stop my share and share a different.
Steve, that's unfortunately time on this segment.
I'll do that next time I come up. Thank you.
Okay, that's perfectly acceptable. So Felix, we have a question from the audience for you. You had said that systems that allow you to show your level of support for different candidates are better, and approval voting seems to have the least ability to do that kind of thing. How do voters show a difference of level of support using approval voting?
It's easy. There's the people they do support or the people they don't support, and those are the 2 levels. You only get one, distinction of fidelity. So there is a level. It's not necessarily between the people that you support. It just asks the most basic question you possibly can: would you tolerate this person in office or not? I mean, or like this person in office. I think that might be a better way to put it. And so it's the easiest thing about it is just, like we can compare like the level of fidelity that you get on various different voting methods, but as long as each choice is
It's not as
independent, the question is like,
detailed,
well,
but the general premise is
the
there.
reason why star voting exists, and I'm sorry actually to speak for you, Sarah, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, is because of criticism from ranked choice voting, right? So star does an amazing thing where it takes the best out of approval voting, which is the independence of alternatives, but it also captures the scenario of like, well, what if there's this kind of majority support?
It's kind of hilarious that like not only Sarah, excluding Sarah, two of the other people support star voting as well. Hey, the facts speak for themselves. When you really dive into what star voting is, I do think from what all the voting methods that I'm aware of, it is the best voting method. I am completely in support of star voting and what it provides.
How do we show that? And that's why there's an instant runoff built into it. So effectively, it takes what we learned from ranked choice voting, it takes the benefits of score and approval voting and matches it into one, but it adds complexity. And I think we've all kind of noticed that the way that the conversation is trending here is that ranked choice voting is a very poor alternative when we actually know what we want. And when it comes down to it, social choice theory was not a mature domain of research when the RCV folks were getting started. In fact, the first thing the ranked choice voting folks wanted to start was single transferable vote, a plurality voting method. That's great. You should totally use single transferable vote. But when they lost in passing that in San Francisco, they said, well, what do? Now San Francisco uses districts. Those are single winner districts. We're not going to have a multi-winner election. Well, what's single winner ranked choice voting? It's called instant runoff, and now they just call it ranked choice voting as a simple thing for it. But ultimately, no one took a step back to say, is this a good voting method? And when people did that, the Center for Election Science did that, when the Equal Vote Coalition did that, we come up and say, no, ranked choice voting is not a good voting method. I think we spent so much time talking about that ranked choice voting isn't good. I want us to spend a little bit more time talking about like what a world looks like when we have a good voting method. And specifically for approval voting, the fact that we work with existing voting machines means it costs nothing to implement ranked choice voting. It's nothing to implement approval voting. That's why we've been able to implement it in St. Louis, Missouri. They wanted to do ranked choice voting. They were more aware of it, but they came to us when they found out that they would have to replace their voting machines, and they literally did not have the budget for it. And they've been a lot more happy having approval voting.
That is a very interesting point in terms of what's the logistics behind adopting a new voting method. I think that is a very interesting point for sure.
That's certainly than they would have using ranked choice voting, because it's easy to implement.
Approval voting would be
and
better
it's
than
easy
our
for the other
current system
administrators
too. I'm not
run,
gonna lie.
right? We've talked about all the various different errors that that ranked choice voting has, and Steve has not said that those don't exist, right? Those are fact. There are also a number of places that have repealed ranked choice voting. We haven't seen any situations where approval voting has been repealed. We're very happy for that. But we have seen a lot of situations where we've had a campaign and then ranked choice voting went in with hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to be able to undermine the democratic process of getting approval voting implemented, such as in Seattle. So, if there's anything
Ranked
we can
choice
ask the
voting,
Center
you're a bunch of
about this,
scumbags
we would
apparently.
like the ranked choice voting group to be better neighbors and to allow us to have independent elections and campaigns as opposed to them interfering in the ones in which we're trying to move forward.
Damn.
And for them to
Get up,
honestly,
RCV. Get
read
up.
a few more modern
Get
books on
up.
social choice theory and
Getting jumped.
let
I'm
the
not
customers
gonna
win,
lie.
as
It's
opposed
getting
to
cooked.
sticking with something that's a little bit more outdated, but is the horse they've chosen.
Okay, thank you for that. I do want to move on to a question for Phil. If we could, bring Phil eyes on back in here. Make sure your camera's on, Phil. And because the question is this, I mean, you spoke about the advantages, and this is a question from our audience. You spoke of the advantage of traditional voting being familiar and simple, and it avoids the problems of these alternative voting methods. Are there any other advantages, such as should there be only two candidates in an election? Are there other things that are kind of traditional and simple that should be done more?
Like I think that there's like a couple things in this. So why are you modifying the election? Why do you want to make changes? What exactly benefit? What metric are you measuring? And so I was a banker for 10 years, Wells Fargo, KeyBank, a commercial banker, did mortgage and things like that. I'm mostly focused on the financial aspects but you can measure, could be cheaper, could be better, could be faster, could increase turnout. That's what a lot of these ranked choice voting people claim, but it doesn't do any of those things. So we have this system. It works. So for instance, from 2010 to 2020 in Alaska, it cost 3.3 million. So we get ranked choice voting and it was 11 million. That's not better. It's definitely not cheaper. So that's not a good route. So it depends upon the system that we're implementing. And so if we're like, okay, plurality in that circumstance is better because it's cheaper. Right off the bat, it's a better system because it's a much, much cheaper. It's 328% cheaper than the other option. And so I would rather have that just for that purpose, because I don't think government should have unlimited money. I also don't like the fact that, the state of Alaska wrote a petition, said it was $150,000, and that's what they were going to spend on voter education, and then go on to spend $3 million later. They didn't have the vote. They didn't have the voters' approval to spend the $3 million. They had the legislature special approval to spend it. But that's, again, it's allowing governments to have too much control. The election errors that happened in Oakland, the election errors that happened in Alaska, both same year, both using ranked choice voting, those things are cause for concern. The concern is that the election officials have the ability to make these mistakes in the first place. So I would say that simplicity is paramount. And as we move further, as my background, see like a drone in the back here, I've deal with AI and drones on a daily basis, and specifically computer vision applications. And I can tell you, AI is far more sophisticated than any technology we currently have, and it's at its very beginning phases. So I believe something as important as elections should be very, very simple for everyone, every single person to understand it. I'm going to give you a brief story. 19-year-old disabled girl, a person with disability that I met in Juneau on my way of collecting signatures. Her father and her mom all came to a signing event. And in that, they all signed the petition to repeal ranked choice voting. And I just got into conversation, and the girl said that she cried in the voting booth because that was the very first time she ever voted. She was 19, and she cried in the voting booth because the system was too complicated. I met Vietnam vets that said they would never vote again because of ranked choice voting. They don't believe that their votes counted. These are the things that I'm afraid of for all election reforms. So even though plurality is not the perfect system, it's simple, and until you actually do the proper education, it is absolutely necessary to make sure that everyone is aware of what changes you are making before making them, if you want to have a credible system. Otherwise, people won't engage. And in doing so, Alaska, we had the lowest voter turnout in history, followed by the highest turnout in a primary ever in history. So you had tons of people show up to primary, and no one showed up to the general because they already felt like the results were already taken from them. And that was so crazy because in that election, the special general, 112,000 Republicans voted for a Republican, and only 75,000 people voted for a Democrat. And yet the Democrat won the election with a 36,000 vote difference between the two. That's the kind of thing that it will drive people not to show up. They just won't show up to the election, the next one. So we can't have things like that happen. In Utah, turnout showed after one election.
Well, that's time.
Okay,
Thank you.
Sorry, can I finish real quick?
Yeah.
So in Utah, one election, ranked choice voting, they had the turnout was the same. After the next one was a 10% drop as well. So there's multiple instances of turnout going down after using ranked choice.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I want to bring this question back to Sarah this time. And for Sarah, a question from our audience: why does STAR require 2 steps? Why doesn't the rating ranking strategy result in a winner in step 1?
Yeah, so score voting is another system that we actually do support. And
That was a good
that's
answer
where
from
candidate
the other
5
guy.
stars, the highest scoring candidate overall wins. And score voting and star voting get the same winner the vast, like high 90s% of the time. The reason for the automatic top 2 runoff is contrary to what Steve said. Star voting ensures a majority preferred winner, just like any other top 2 runoff. That's actually the only way to ensure a majority preferred winner. So the 2 highest scoring candidates advance, and your one person, one vote goes to the finalist you prefer. So what that does is, let's say I'm a Black voter in the South, and on my ballot, we've got, again, I'm going to go with the Nazi, and we've got a family values.
I love a lot of these
and then we've got,
people of color
Democrat,
examples.
progressive, and I know that none of the left people are going to win. With star voting, I'm able to show, 1 star for that family values conservative, 0 stars for the Nazi. And in that runoff round, even though I gave a 1 point difference in the scoring round, in the runoff round, my vote is just as powerful as everybody else's because star voting is 1 person, 1 vote. And that's what the runoff does.
So basically what she's saying here is that once they get to the runoff round, so it's like the top 2 move on to the second round, the runoff round. The one that is favored more, like higher ranked, higher rated in terms of the star, like 4 to 3, like she said, like 1 to 0, you get the entirety of that vote for the runoff round, right? So the example she gave was that a conservative versus a Nazi. The conservative is a 1. You thought like 3 other candidates more. The Nazi's a 0. But when it's in the runoff, only those 2, your entire vote goes to the conservative. So that's what she's saying. I'll break it down.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Do you have any more
Go
time
ahead.
there?
Yes.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to touch on is in Alaska, and Phil got cut off a little short there, but in Alaska, 60% of voters preferred one of those two Republicans, and voters had been told that vote splitting was eliminated. But what we hear with ranked choice voting is, if my first choice is eliminated, my vote will transfer to my next choice, and that is completely false for everyone whose second choice makes that runoff in ranked choice voting. So some voters will have their favorite eliminated and their next choice counted, and other voters, like Sarah Palin voters in that election, had their first choice eliminated. Palin was the spoiler in that election, but her voters' next choice was never counted, even those who did have a next choice. And so that's just a fundamentally unfair thing that I do think violates the Equal Protections Clause. If some voters are going to have their next choice counted in the same scenario, then others should too.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. I have another question I want to pass on to Steve. This is coming in from our guests out here who I hopefully are getting a lot of great information. It sounds like they are. Is one method of voting better than another when there's more than one candidate who can be elected? And how about what is the difference between these voting methods if there's only two candidates in a race?
I'm not sure I understand the question when you say more than one candidate can be elected. I thought are we talking about a multi-winner election, like for city council?
This would be like a multi-winner election.
Right. I thought we were only talking about single winner systems here.
Okay.
Winner systems.
No. You're fair. That's right. Let me make sure I'm reading the question right. So I guess that's the thing. How about that? Are all these voting methods, in your opinion, equivalent in a two-person race?
In a two-person race, I would.
It's very interesting you didn't want to answer that question. And I don't know if there's a particular reason. I don't know if he doesn't have a good answer. I don't know if they agreed upon a certain conversation. A lot of it is very interesting.
Imagine that, well, again, in approval, your second favorite can hurt your first favorite. 99 people may prefer A to B, but B's okay, so they approve both of them. And then one person definitely wants B to be elected, so only approves B, and so B wins, even though 99 preferred A to B. So you lose that information in approval voting. Most political scientists agree that plurality is the absolute worst setting. Vote splitting does occur and has been exploited. The first Mayor Daley of Chicago made sure that if he had one opponent, he had two, so that the anti-Daley vote would be split. And my understanding about the Alaska race, everyone focuses on Mary Peltola and the House of Representatives election, but it also elected a moderate Democrat, reelected a moderate Republican, to the Senate, Lisa Murkowski, and it reelected a conservative governor, Mike Dunleavy, I think his name is.
Mike Dunleavy, isn't that a basketball player? I kind of want to end it here. I'm going to end it here. That's all we got for today. I think this was very interesting. Hopefully you guys gained something from it. I learned that ranked choice voting is cooked. So let me know what y'all think in the comment section below. And if y'all want to support star voting, you can go to the I think starvoting.org, Equal Vote Coalition. You can look them up, support what they got, so we can have better voting methods. So we don't have to so we can have a voting method to put in the best candidates, so we never ever have a Donald Trump versus Joe Biden ever again. Let me know what you guys think. Appreciate y'all. You have a good one. Take care and peace.